Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm honored to say that today with us, that Scott Weiner is with us today, calling in from New York. Scott is the well-known technology advisor, and I think he doesn't need more introduction. Scott, thank you for joining us. The floor is yours.
All set? All right. Well, hi, everyone. It's good to see you. And I'm excited to meet with all of you and talk about this subject. It's one that anyone who knows me knows it's near and dear to my heart, business value. Let me bring up my presentation and I'll give you a little bit of background. Where is it? There we go. Let me know. Can you see it? So a couple things. So a little background. A couple months ago, I was talking to some Agile practitioners about how they measured the performance of their teams. And the topic of business value came up, and I started describing to them a technique or process that I like to use for measuring business value, and also talked about some of the benefits of using an approach like this. So the technique itself is pretty simple. You're all going to kind of walk away and be able to do it. If you don't already know it, you may have already been familiar with it and just not remembered it or use it on a daily basis. And we're going to talk a little bit about why you might not use it every day as well. We're going to try to keep the presentation moving pretty fast. And at the end, I'll be happy. We're going to go into kind of a Q&A, and I'll be happy to answer more detailed questions for you. There are a couple points where I'm going to ask you for your input. So do be prepared to type into the chat some responses, and Alex will read them off to me, and we'll try to work that way. So quick background for those who don't know me. Scott Weiner, a fractional CTO. I work with a lot of organizations. I'm the transformational practice lead at New Eon. And what we do is we work with companies that are large and small in many different sectors. As a technology advisor, we also help with technology selection, their cloud strategy, their cybersecurity and risk profiles, as well as business agility, which is where I spend a lot of my time, is in that, as well as agile transformation. And through this practice of working with all these organizations over the last decade or so, I've been involved with hundreds of companies, I would say, and I've lost track of how many teams. And so what you're going to hear today is really more my opinion and experience working with this particular topic of team performance and business value and how they intersect each other. So you may have different experiences. I really want to hear about your experiences as well. And with that, I'm going to just kind of kick it off. And the first thing I want to talk about is the notion of a burn down chart. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with this. This is a Jira. This comes from the Jira application. This is their burn down chart. And what it's showing, if you don't know, is given a number of story points that we want to deliver over, let's say, a 2-week period. The red line is showing every time it drops that we've delivered some number of story points. We're going to talk about what that means. And the gray line is showing the optimal, meaning if we deliver the same number of story points every day, it would go down at a relatively smooth curve. Maybe we don't work on the weekend, so it flattens out on the weekend. So I have several problems with this graph when it comes to talking about team performance. And the first one is that story points cannot, should not, must not be used as a math tool. So the fact that on this graph right now, story points are being added on the left-hand side so that there's 48 story points, what does that really mean? It means we took a whole bunch of different pieces of value that we wanted to deliver, and based on its complexity, its risk, its effort, we gave it a number, but that number represents really high, medium, low, or relative value. Something that is larger than something else simply means that it's more complex or more uncertain or going to take longer, but it has nothing to do with the actual value of what we're delivering. So the first problem is that you can't add these story points together in any rational way. And yet, I don't know if you do, but most people I've encountered do. We do this irrational thing when we see a number. We have this need to do math with it, add them together, even though those numbers don't represent actual values. They represent places of relative size. So this doesn't even make sense. We're delivering story points. That's the first problem I have with it. And that's a conceptual problem. That's philosophical. That's the way I look at it. But the second problem, the larger one that we're going to talk about today, is it doesn't tell me how the team's actually performing. Because all I know at this point from this particular graph, and you can do the same thing with other graphs, burn up, and other types of charts. All I really know is that over a period of time, something was completed that had a weight of some number of story points. And therefore, I'm considering that a good thing or a bad thing. And the fact that it's near this gray line tells me not a lot. It tells me some information. It might be useful, but it's certainly not telling me how the team's performing. And yet many teams I go into use this chart as a way of proving that they're performing well. And it just doesn't make sense to me. And that's where our conversation begins, is how do we think about performance? Why do we think about performance? And what are better ways of thinking about how our team is performing? And that led me to what I care about most, which is business value as a measure of performance of a team. Are they delivering business value? That's not the only way to measure performance. It's the one we're going to focus on today. But before we get to that, I just got a question. And I'd love you to put this in the chat right now. Why do you think teams bother measuring performance? Why does it even matter? I mean, if you have a decent Scrum team and they're working hard and you believe in your team and they're doing their best, why are you measuring their performance at all? Why are they measuring it? What's your goal? That's the first thing. And I'm not saying there's a right and a wrong here. I'm really curious if you could just in the chat real quick, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Why do teams measure performance? I'll give you a second.
So there are answers already in the chat.
Let's just do a couple of answers.
Yeah, so there was an answer saying that the hierarchy in the company asks for the performance metrics. Then, well, to inspect and adapt, that's another answer. As well, to additionally incentivize getting better and identifying areas for improvement.
Yeah, I think that's all great. I think I like that first one, especially the idea that the hierarchy in the company is asking for performance. Here's a little secret, if you don't already know this. When your management is asking you for a metric of any kind, a measurement, there's an element of that says they don't trust you. I mean, if you really think about it, if you really think about why they need to know how you're doing, there's a trust component to it. And you need to think about why they don't trust you and what you can do about that. Typically, what it comes down to is either you're not delivering value at a consistent pace that they can count on, you're not predictable, reliable, and so on, or you're not creating enough visibility into what you're doing. And so they're asking for ways for them to measure you, to hold you accountable. Now, it may be that they're in the middle of this hierarchy you described, and the fact is they're not being trusted, and so they're asking you because they're being asked. So it gets complex, but the reality is that is one reason that performance gets really focused on, especially in larger organizations, is communication and trust become an issue. I like the idea of using performance as a way of inspecting and adapting, which is a very strong principle, obviously, of Scrum. And I think that's great. The danger is, and we'll talk about this more, is that we focus on the wrong metrics. And therefore, we do get better at things, but not necessarily the right things. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so here are some ways that people measure performance. All of them are valid for different reasons, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. But just be careful, because some of these are not as valuable for measuring the overall performance of the team. And a lot of them will not contribute to measuring business value, which is the topic for today. So if you were going to measure business value, for instance, velocity is probably not the thing I would pick first. I almost consider that a vanity metric in some ways. Same with story points as part of velocity. I wouldn't consider lines of code a measure of business value at all. But there are other ones in here where we could debate, where we may not agree on whether or not they contribute to business value. I'll give you an example. lead time, the time it takes you to take a customer request and deliver it. Is that part of business value, a measure of business value? Maybe, but if the thing you're delivering really fast with your super fast lead time isn't valuable, is it really helping you measure business value? So we do need to be kind of cognizant of the fact that we can't assume everything we measure is valuable for the same purposes. And here's another thing I really want to stress today. We can't measure everything. Here's a list of ways you can measure performance. If you're measuring all of these on a regular basis, I promise you that's not going to give you the best results for your team, even if you're just talking about inspect and adapt. Why? Because it's sort of like driving an automobile down the road and having 70 dials or displays in front of you while you're driving. If you had 70 different displays showing different numbers as you were driving down the road, how likely are you to pay attention to any of them? You're more likely to crash your car. So you have to figure out which ones are most important and really focus down on them, at least for some period of time, if you truly are trying to inspect and adapt or get better at what you're doing. You have to pick your battles. So what I'm trying to set up for you is, if business value is the one you want to focus on, if that's what you really care about, then you need to focus down onto business value as the thing that you're going to measure for performance. So if you want to maximize the business value of your team, it has to be what you measure. Because remember this, if you take away nothing else from this talk, we measure what we value and we end up valuing what we measure. So if we're forced to measure something, even if we don't believe in it, over time, it is the thing we tend to value. And that can create a lot of bad practices if we're not careful as well. And we'll talk about that more. So what is business value? Just so we're clear, so we're all talking about the same thing, because it can mean different things to different people. I'm talking about something that is quantifiable and qualitative. It's a measure of the positive impact that your project or whatever you're working on is making on your organization. So at a high level, it tends to be something that contributes to increasing revenue or reducing costs, or somehow improving efficiency, making your customers happier, strengthening your competitive advantage, or mitigating risk. It's something in that genre. Now, it could be something else, but these are the key things it typically is. It aligns with the organization's strategic objectives, really, is what I'm looking for. So the things you do every day, are they contributing to your strategic objective of your company? And can you draw a straight line to it? And if not, it's really hard to determine if what you're doing is creating business value. And one of the things we're going to talk about is the prioritization process at the end of this. And it's really important that we understand the business value we're contributing in order to do that. And you'll see that. So some reasons for maximizing business value. Why would you want to do this versus, I don't know, maximizing your technical excellence or your quality as your main focus, as your primary focus? Alignment with business goals is a really important part of being a Scrum team, because when you maximize business value, what you're ensuring is that the team's efforts are directly contributing to the strategic objectives of the company. And here's what that does. That, among other things, builds trust. And what did we talk about before? What's one of the reasons that management tends to want us to measure our performance? Trust. So the more aligned you are with the business goals of the company and delivering on those business goals, the more they trust you. And that has a virtuous cycle it creates. And so that's what we're really looking for. Ironically, well, I don't know if that's the right word for it, we're promoting agility by focusing on business value. Because when you focus on business value and delivering the maximum at that, you're going to more easily adapt to changing conditions, because what it means is culturally, the way you think about things, the way you prioritize, the way you organize, what you value in your daily tasks are the things that are driving the company. And that implies you know what they are. You have to know what the strategic vision of your company is, these strategic objectives and the way they're measuring success at any given moment. So if they change, if market conditions change, for instance, you have to be aligned with that in order to deliver maximum business value, or you can't. So this idea of creating a culture focused on maximizing business value does promote agility. It supports the things that we talk about when we talk about agility. Also, when you focus on maximizing business value as a Scrum team, you will find over time, not necessarily day one, when you start to do this, that you will enhance the team's motivation and engagement drastically in some cases. I have not yet worked with a team where they truly understood the purpose of the work they did and how it connected completely to the goals of the company and how the company was going to better the world, but through what they do, that they didn't feel more motivated, more focused, more aligned with what the work they were doing. They always feel better when they feel aligned with business value. So everyone wins when we can do this. All right. And here's a lot of different ways we talk about measuring business value. There's lots of ways you can measure business value. I want to talk more about how we prioritize our work to ensure we're delivering the most business value. We maximize business value. But in terms of measuring it, there's lots of ways. And so it's not that it's hard to measure business value. It's that we have to decide which ones are most important to us. Because remember what I said before, you can't measure everything and expect to stay focused on everything. You have to pick your topics. What's going to drive you? Is it a key performance indicator? Is it some business model analysis that you've done that's kind of giving you a sense of where you're at and where you need to go? Whatever it is, you need to really be clear on it, and everyone needs to align to that set of measurements. Otherwise, you'll be talking past each other. If someone's focused on customer impact while someone else is focused on lifetime value of the customer, those are going to be different conversations about value. So you have to make sure that you're aligning, and this is the entire organization, not just at the team level. So why is this so challenging? I just gave you a whole bunch of reasons why business value is great. And I showed you how it's really easy to find lots of ways to measure business value. So why is it that people don't do this more often? Why is it so hard? Well, the reason mainly is that we focus on other things in our teams. And from a perspective, and this is just from the perspective of I want to maximize business value, we have misaligned incentives. So in other words, the incentives might be perfectly fine for what you're doing, but if what you want is to maximize business value, we may be focusing on the wrong things. We may not be focusing on business value. For instance, in a team, it's not unusual to hear a lot of talk about how many story points we delivered, as I said before. Story points are not business value. It's that simple. So no matter how many story points you delivered and how much you pat yourself on the back for it, that's not value. You could say, well, we only create stories that are valuable. Really? How do you know? Does every stakeholder agree on that business value? How do you know that? And this is a problem I run into a lot. I will go into organizations. This happens a lot. I will go up to a developer and I'll say, how's it going today? And they'll say great or not great or whatever they say. And the next thing I ask them is, how do you know? Like if you say it's great, how do you know that your day's going great? And the answer I get more than not is, I finished my task. And when they say that, the first thing I ask them is, how do you know your task is valuable? And I must have asked this close to 1,000 times by now. I mean, I've asked this a lot. And I almost never get a good answer back from that third question. When I ask, how do you know the task you just worked on is valuable? I get stumbling, I get hesitation, I get half answers most of the time. In other words, this person who's cranking out code and cranking out tasks and cranking out stories doesn't really know if what they're doing is valuable or valued by the company on a day-to-day basis. That's a problem. And that's a common problem. Now, one of the reasons this happens is there's a lack of clarity in the organization on what their strategic goals are. I can go up to almost anyone in your organization and I can ask the question, what do you guys do here? What's this company do? And pretty much everyone can tell me. When I ask the question, how do you do it? What's your process? Most people have some sense of the process and where things go. There's probably some silos and black boxes within the company that they don't really understand, but generally they know how things get done in the company. But when I ask, why do you do this? I get so many different answers. I don't get a consistent answer when I go through the organization. That's a lack of clarity, a lack of alignment on strategic goals. So even the ones that know what the goals are, don't know how what they do align with those goals. Often, not all the time, of course. So that's a problem. Another problem is short-term focus. When you're driving, well, I'll tell you, when I first started to learn how to drive, one of the problems I had is I was a terrible driver. Maybe arguably I still am, but I would I would look right in front of the hood of my car while I was driving, like right in front of the hood. And so what happened was everything was surprising me because as I was driving, everything was coming up fast on me and I was having to make quick decisions and everything was stressful and scary. And then my instructor finally got me to look down the road, look past the front of my car and look way down the road. And all of a sudden I was able to relax and anticipate. And as things change, as the road changed, as the conditions changed, I could respond to them more effectively. So if you have a short-term focus, if the way your team is focused is very short-term, it's very difficult to prioritize for business value. Oftentimes you're making decisions at the expense of business value. In fact, you're thinking about your short-term needs versus your long-term goals. And so when you're aligned with business value, most of the time you'll find yourself having a little bit longer view of the world. Not always, but that's what happens. And then finally, resisting to adapting. That's another reason why we tend to go towards what's comfortable. So what ends up happening a lot of times is we will find ourselves so focused on wanting to do what we've already planned to do, the work we already have in our backlog, for instance, or working the way we've always worked, that we are resistant to and find excuses for not following where the market is going and where the business is going. And we kind of almost put our heads down and focus on the work ahead of us, right ahead of us, rather than really aligning with the business itself. You know, we were told to build this, so we're going to build it, regardless of what the value is of it. That happens way too often. So these are just some examples of reasons we focus on other things. It's not, and by the way, it's not that we're not delivering something important or valuable in some way, but are they strategic and are we maximizing the value of what we're building? It's the maximization that I'm talking about right now, not the idea that we're not delivering any value. Almost anything you build can be justified as valuable, but is it the maximum value? That's what we're really talking about here. I hope that's clear. So instead of focusing on what's valuable, we'll often focus on things like vanity metrics, as we talked about, maybe personal objectives. The one that always, I think, trips people up is the improvement metrics or improvement processes. So, if I said to you, technical excellence isn't business value, that may or may not be obvious to you. But the bottom line is, if you're focused all the time on improving your technology, which is an important part of Agile, no doubt about it. But if you're focused on it all the time, if that's what you're measuring, if that's what's number one importance to you, you're going to find it hard to focus on maximizing business value. You've got to find that balance. And that's the other thing I want to make sure is clear, is that this is about creating a culture that focuses on business value, but not at the expense of everything else. You still need technical excellence and quality. Maybe you need to get better at your estimations. I don't know, but you do need to kind of find that right balance. And the balance is not the same for every organization, for sure. And this is, I think, part of the struggle when people ask me, how can we maximize business value in our situation? It turns out that there's a common practice you can try to follow, and that's what we're going to go through now. So I want to go back to that burn down chart for a second. Imagine on that burn down chart, rather than story points on the left-hand side, what if we were tracking business value? What if instead of looking at our performance through the lens of how many stories or story points that we deliver, we looked at it through how much business value have we delivered, how much business value we burned down or burned up, depending on how you want to measure. What if you could quantify business value in a numeric way so that it was actually on a scale? Because business value can be intangible, it can be subjective, it can be preference. And so what we want to do is come up with a technique that allows us to do just what I'm showing you right here, allows us to look at business value as something we've burned down, because that's how we're going to maximize it. We're going to first prioritize using this technique of quantifying business value, and then we're going to use it to track how much value we deliver. And by the way, if you can do this, all of a sudden, it gets easier to create trust with other parts of the organization because you can show them directly how you're delivering business value. All right, so here's the general approach, and I'll keep this pretty quick. It's really not that hard, honestly. That's the other thing that's great about this. It's just that you have to have a culture that thinks about this and focuses on it. Here's the hardest part of the whole thing. Number one, the company, the organization, the leadership must first identify 3 to 5 strategic drivers or metrics of success for your business. And it's different for every business, but every business has a limited set of key metrics or drivers. These can be in the form of KPIs or OKRs. It doesn't matter how you do it. All that matters is you have some way to quantify that these 3 to 5 topics, these areas are going to drive success for our business where we are today. Now, those metrics may change over time, but for some period of time, let's call it 18 months, several years, these are the things that are kind of pushing our business forward. And every good leader knows what those 3 to 5 things are. I can go up to any CEO of any company that's doing well, and they can rattle these off instantly. They know what drives their business. Now, that doesn't mean every company does, and it doesn't mean every company communicates them effectively, and it doesn't mean every company is looking at the right things. So there's some work to be done here, and I'm not saying this is simple. That's the hardest part of this whole process. But let's just kind of suspend disbelief for a moment, and let's assume that our business can actually identify its 3 to 5 strategic drivers. And remember, why does it have to be 3 to 5? Because it's probably not one. It's probably not just one thing that makes your company a success or not a success. And it can't be 70. It can't be 100. It's got to be a small set. Otherwise, you can't pay attention to it and you can't align everyone around it. So once you have these 3 to 5 strategic drivers, you're going to weight them or prioritize them. So in other words, if one driver for my business was customer acquisition, how many customers we bring in the door, and another driver for my business was customer lifetime of the customer, that was another one. They don't have equal weight. At this moment in time for my business, whether I'm in a growth mode or sustain mode or whatever I'm in, I'm going to weight them probably differently. I don't have to. They could be weighted equally, but I have an opportunity to set the dials, if you will, on how much weight each of those metrics is going to give me in this model we're going to look at. Then what I'm going to do is for each of the metrics, I'm going to create an objective scale. And what's an objective scale? Well, so for instance, if we take the example I gave of customer acquisition, I could say that given a feature we want to build, will this feature impact our ability to acquire more customers? And if it doesn't, maybe that's a 0. Maybe it impacts it a little bit, or it has the potential of having a little bit of impact. Well, maybe call it a 1 or 3. And if it's critical to customer acquisition, we can't get more customers unless we do this. Well, maybe it's at the highest level of our scale. Maybe that's a 9 on our scale. Your scale can be whatever you want it to be. I tend to use 369 or Fibonacci or something like that. So now, for each initiative or story or whatever it is we're gonna kind of weigh on this business value model, we're going to give it a numeric of, let's say, 0.369 on my scale for each metric. But it's objective in this way. The 3 is not a relative size like it would be in story points. The 3 has a description that's objective, that describes a specific outcome or benefit of having this particular thing done. And so everyone can sort of agree on it. Look, there's always some subjectivity in this. There's no way to drive all subjectivity out of the idea of value, but we can get it pretty close to the point where we can agree a 3 means something pretty specific to our business, and a 6 means something different. So we're going to give the metric a weight, and we're going to multiply it by the weight of that particular category. And I'm going to show you this on an example in a second, so this will get a little less confusing. We're going to just add all those values together, and that gives us a score, which we're going to call the business value score. It's the number that you will see on that burn down chart. So let me show you how this works. Let's consider a manufacturer who decided to build an online store, and they believe they have a compelling product, but it's difficult for customers to acquire it through their distributors. So, because it's a custom built product. So what they decided is they need an online presence of their own, and they need their marketing to be effective to be successful. And so what they've determined as a company is that for their plan to increase their sales to be successful, they need to focus on customer acquisition, new customers, customer satisfaction, keep customers coming back, and the ability to upsell customers during their checkout process so that they buy even more on the way out. Because once they get them to that checkout, there's an opportunity to upsell them they don't want to lose. So these are the 3 drivers right now for this business, okay? So the company starts by defining a weight for each of those categories. Customer acquisition, they're going to put it at a 2. Customer satisfaction, they're going to put it at a 1. And the ability to upsell, they're going to put it at a 1.5 weighting. And that's a management decision. So once management's kind of set this in stone, that's what we're going with. So now what they're saying is customer acquisition is the most critical thing right now. But while we do care about customer satisfaction, upselling is a little bit more important to us because that's going to be the real test of the business at this particular stage. What's nice is these dials over time can be changed. But right now, this is what we've agreed to. This is what we're saying is kind of the customer, the drivers for this company. So now let's imagine we have a couple of features that we want to try out in this model. So the first thing we're going to do is for each of those categories, I'll start with customer acquisition. I'm going to say in my scoring scale, 0, 3, 6, 9, what does a 0 mean? What does a 3 mean? And so on. Now, these are very simplistic examples just for the purpose of putting on the slide. But in reality, you'd want something a little bit more specific and detailed so that everybody really, truly can align around it. But for our purposes, this is enough of a description. And so you would do the same thing, not just for customer acquisition, but also for customer retention and so on. So for each category, you would create a scale like this. And then here's what will happen. Here's an example where I have 3 stories on the left here, or requirements on the left-hand side. The first one is I want to be able to have the ability to send custom coupons to my prospects, so to entice them to come to the store. Then I want to be able to also streamline my checkout process, because if I can get them through the process faster, that will increase satisfaction and the likelihood that they actually buy something. And then I want to also display related items during the checkout process as well, and other places in the system maybe, so that there's opportunities to upsell. So what I've done is I've said, if you look at the first 6 on the top left here, I've said that for customer acquisition, emailing coupons is very important. It's not critical, it's not life or death for us, but it's very important. And then I've said that for streamlining the checkout process will help with customer acquisition a little bit. And displaying related items probably isn't going to help me get a customer acquired. It may help me upsell. And so as you can see, we go through and we put a number in each of these buckets. And these can be debated, these can be discussed, they can be rationalized, they can be researched. But at the end of the day, we come up with numbers. And then all we do is we do a little bit of multiplication and addition. So if I look at email coupon, 6 times 2 is 12, plus 3 times 1 is 15. And then 3 times 1.5 is 4.5. And I end up with 19.5 as a score. That's my score. We do the same thing with Streamline. We multiply 3 times 2, 3 times 1, and so on. And so what you end up with at the end of this is you'll find that you have 3 scores. And if you prioritize based on these scores, you should be delivering the most business value you can. Now, I want to be careful about a couple of things. First of all, these numbers are not some accurate reflection of business value. They simply help you group things quickly. So if you have a large backlog, for instance, you can quickly get things organized by business value. It doesn't mean that if something's 19.5 and something else is 19.0, automatically the 19.5 should come first. There's still some thought that has to go into it. There are other factors you have to take into consideration. But let's take the example here. If I have 2 that have 19.5 as their business value, which one should I do first? So this is where using weighted shortest job first, WSJF, if you're not familiar with it, is a really good idea. And basically all that says is, given 2 items of the same value, we should do the one that is going to take the least effort first. So the effort comes into play mainly when we have things that are similar or equal in value. We want to do the smaller one first. Why? Because when we do the smaller one first, what are we actually saying we're going to do? We're going to deliver value sooner. We're going to be able to we're going to be more of a value engine. Again, this is where things are equal. So story points or effort come into play when things are similar or equal to each other in this process. And what we end up doing is prioritizing our backlog based on business value. But the best part of this is the way we came to these numbers is fairly objective, and we can talk about it. If you don't agree that this is a 3, okay, we can talk about it, but we don't talk about the 3. We talk about what the 3 means. Are you saying that this does not have the potential to help with acquisition? Well, let's talk about that. That's a really good, healthy conversation for stakeholders to have. That's very different than saying, I think it's more important to streamline than it is to have email. Those are very difficult conversations to have. Everyone has a preference. This helps us focus and align to what's driving the business. because there could be other factors, but this is the ones we said are driving the business. So this is weighted shortest job first. Basically, you start out with a backlog with lots of different things at different sizes in it. First thing you're going to do is prioritize. So you have your top high priorities at the top, low priorities at the bottom. And then you're going to organize within similar priorities. You're going to organize the smallest one first. And what you'll notice here is in every case, by putting the smallest one first in each category, we end up delivering more value sooner. That's what ends up happening. So to put this all together and summarize this, prioritization should be ruthless and relentless in a Scrum environment. We should be constantly reflecting, our backlog should reflect our current understanding of the state of our business. So you need a tool or a way to prioritize quickly. And if you're going to focus on business value as the driver of that priority, you need something like this to help you quickly assess. And this works. And again, I would avoid vanity metrics when you're talking about team performance. Don't get hung up on things like how many points you delivered. Those aren't really have anything to do with the value of the team, and it can lead to some really bad anti-patterns, which we can talk about later. Measure what you value as a team, because whatever you measure, you will end up valuing over time, whether you like it or not. This can lead to some really bad practices if you're not careful. If you're measuring the wrong things, people will game the system. It's human nature, and you'll end up with the wrong focus. Align what you value with the business value. This has so many benefits. It's a healthy way to measure and understand team performance as well. So it has multiple benefits, by doing this. You're building trust and you're building alignment. And create objective scales. Don't be too generic with your scoring. As I said, I used a fairly generic in the slide deck just to make the point, but you really do want it to be as specific as you can so that you can get as much of the subjectivity out of the conversation. And use effort to help prioritize when the scores are similar. This is the weighted shortest job first. This will enable you to deliver more value sooner. Okay, and with that, I just want to give you one more bonus tip. When you do this, I recommend adding these two items to your list of weights: opportunity cost and urgency. I have found these to be extremely valuable. So, and you weight them the same way. You come up with a weighting value. Opportunity cost sort of reflects what are we going to lose by not doing this now, and urgency reflects something that we need to do right away to get the value from it. So both of these together, they interplay with each other. I have found help kind of tweak. And I found that executives really like these because it gives them a way to put their thumb on the scale a little bit from time to time. And that can be important for them to trust this scale as a tool. So that's something I find I do a lot. So anyway, I hope that's clear. And, afterwards I'll be happy to clarify it more. So that's about it. I know I went through this very fast given the time we had to work with. I'm happy to have offline conversations as well as we're going to talk right now. But I hope this was interesting and useful. Thank you.
Scott, thank you very much for sharing so much information in a condensed way. I'm already looking forward to rewatching the recording and catching up on all the details. And I see there are a lot of questions in the chat. So I would suggest us to stop the recording and move on with the discussion.
Okay.